Hi, I'm Rebecca. That's me with my husband Dave Sellers and our son Liam. And I'm here to tell you about my husband Dave and why you might want him to help you with the heating or cooling for your project. But first I'm going to tell you what I don't recommend him for. It was something that Dave's parents found out pretty early on when Dave was in kindergarten or first grade. Literally the day before his school pictures that year, they found out that he had absolutely no future as a barber or hairdresser. His real talent did quickly become clear, though. He loved fixing things. He loved taking things apart to try to figure out how they worked. And as he got older, he got better at also putting everything back together again. When he was around 15 or 16, he took a hands-on auto engine rebuilding course, and soon after that, rebuilt the engine of his first car and installed it into his 1964 Chevy van. After he graduated, he worked at a small engine repair shop, which involved a lot of troubleshooting, which he still loves to do today. When Dave was only 19, he got a job in a printing plant, operating this sort of industrial machinery. This was the case maker. It made hardcover book covers. And it was very complicated because it took the many components of a book cover and quickly fashioned them together and cranked out a steady stream of covers. So for every single function going on along the way, Dave, as the operator, had to constantly make precise adjustments as it was running and as he watched the quality of the covers. He really had a lot of fun operating this machine. It was very much his element. When Dave and I got married in 1979, we moved to the Adirondacks, and it was in 1984 that Dave had his introduction into the heating industry here. And this is just a small sampling of his work at the time. The company then installed waste oil boilers and furnaces, wood boilers, and coal boilers. In 1985, we left the Adirondacks to go back into the printing industry. We moved downstate. This photo was taken at some point during that time in the late 80s. And it was at this point in time that Dave got quite a bit of experience as an industrial mechanic. One of his responsibilities were the elevators. He had never worked with elevators before, but he was mechanically talented. He read books. He stared at elevator schematics for days at a time, and then he dove into taking care of these elevators. And these older elevators have very complicated wiring and variables. So this is where Dave got hands-on experience with relay logic. He built this device, which brought the elevators up to fire safety codes at the time. He designed all of this circuitry, he purchased the components, and then he set up the wiring. He was also the troubleshooter, so, for example, if an elevator wasn't leveling correctly or was stuck in between floors, he had to look at this thing and figure out which relay wasn't making contact, not pulling in, or had a bad coil or a loose wire. So just multiply the number of contacts here times each other, and that's how many possible issues are causing the problem. And Dave is very gifted that way. He often just intuitively knows what to test in a troubleshooting situation. And of course he won't give up until he has it figured out. Another one of Dave's responsibilities at the printery were these magazine trimming machines, which sliced off the edges from piles of magazines that were moving along on the conveyor belt. These machines were older. They were probably about 30 years old at that time. The printing plant had purchased them used and refurbished, and as they tried to actually use the machine for production, they found out that the refurbishing work had not been satisfactory. So Dave took this machine completely apart. Here's the skeleton. And of course put it back together again so that it actually worked. And while he was at it, he added an automatic lubrication system, a relay logic controller, an electromechanical brake, and later on added a programmable logic controller as well, which means that they could simply enter in by Boolean logic how the machine should run under specified variable conditions. He also designed and built a pneumatic smasher for the machine that would press down on each pile of magazines just before it was trimmed. And here are the air pressure gauge and control panel for that smasher that he designed and assembled. So as you can imagine, Dave spent many months on this project, and these machines really were his babies. Dave just really does have a sixth sense when it comes to anything mechanical like this. So even if he's never used or worked on a particular piece of machinery before, It doesn't take long for him to figure out how it works, how it can be modified and customized, and how to fix it if it's not working right. His next project was related to these magazine trimmers, and it involved the waste paper handling system, because these machines trimmed the jagged sides of the magazines, as I had mentioned, so those paper trimmings had to be disposed of. So on the front and the back of this trimming machine, you see the ductwork here and here that had to be transported away. So the system that Dave installed involved a materials fan on the second floor here that would pull up those trimmings and then go into the filter system. These were the components of the system before they had actually been installed. And then the trimmings were dropped from the second floor to the basement, where the trimmings were automatically baled, and the bales of paper could be sold for recycling. Now, before this system was installed, this was the waste paper handling system. The trimmings were just dropped through a hole in the floor to the basement, and of course, as you can see, mountains, literally from floor to ceiling, had to be manually moved into a baler. So everybody was very happy with the new system that Dave installed. Dave really had a ball with all of this stuff, with his mechanical talents. But in 1989, we decided to move back to the Adirondacks. We left the printing facility, and we really do love this area. We're glad that we could raise our son here. We enjoy boating and camping on the islands of Lake George, as well as skiing at Gore Mountain. But as you may already know, there's not a lot of opportunity in the Adirondack Park for an industrial mechanic. There are no factories here. And Dave had already gotten some experience in the heating business when we lived here in 1984, as I had mentioned. So it's just natural that when we decided to settle down here that Dave got into mechanical contracting, installing heating and cooling systems, snowmelt systems, and he's been doing all of this nonstop now since 1989. Dave's first radiant floor heating installation was for his boss's workshop in 1989. And soon after that, in 89 or 90, here was his first commercial radiant job, a 9,000 square foot facility in Ticonderoga. And of course, when we built our own home in 1992, we installed radiant floors, both in the concrete for the basement, as well as stapled up to the main floor. Here is a commercial heating project that Dave installed right around that same time in 1992. This was outside of the Adirondacks that he traveled for this. It was a gigantic wood gasification boiler with a make-up air fan and 2 large centrifugal pumps. He designed and built the relay logic that you see here, tapping back into his printery days, and of course assembled the control system. Another project that he was involved with was a troubleshooting project. This was a health center nearby in the Adirondacks, a furnace system. Actually, 3 furnaces were all wired together here with this rat's nest that Dave had to make sense out of. And when Dave just touched this ball of wiring, the units were turning on and off. And so he took this fire hazard and transformed it into this. And each one of these control systems for each of the furnaces. Here's a residential project that Dave worked on that included 9 radiant zones and as well as high temperature zones. And this home is a 9,000 square foot residence that overlooks Lake George. And to find out more about that project, if you were to go to our website, davidsellers.com, and select the page regarding radiant floors, there's a link right here to a write-up about that project in a trade magazine. This is actually a reprint of an article about the project. If you scroll down here to this Dave Sellers link, you'll see the article about that home, and here's Dave with the owner of the home if you want to find out more about that. Here was another troubleshooting situation that Dave was able to help out with. This facility is a large commercial building near Albany, New York, for radiant floor heating. And as you can see, they have 5 boilers for this system that they were experiencing trouble with because of the sequencing of the boilers. As Dave discovered, the controls had been wired incorrectly. So he recommended the boiler sequencing controller that you see that he installed here. He was able to just install it back in the same original box for this system, and which of course worked like a charm, and the owner of the facility is very happy with that. This was another 12,000 square foot commercial building near Albany, New York, where Dave designed and installed the radiant floor heat. This is the boiler room at FW Webb, the plumbing and heating supply company in Queensbury, New York, that supplies equipment to many of the heating and plumbing contractors in the area. And Dave designed and installed this system that includes 6 heating zones as well as a snowmelt zone. And there are Dave's relays to operate the air conditioning and heating from the same thermostat, as well as a 2-stage boiler control and snowmelt control for that system. This is an article about a Radiant Panel Association award that Dave won in the year 2000. This was for his Argyle Firehouse Radiant Floor project. And these are just a couple of more of Dave's installations over the years, from commercial and industrial to large and small residential, and now he's getting into the wave of the future, geothermal, solar applications. Dave really does put his heart and soul into all of his projects, and now you can tap into this kind of indoor comfort and energy savings expertise for your project too, whether you hire him to help with your heating, cooling, solar hot water, or snowmelt project. So thanks so much for taking this journey with me, folks, and please don't hesitate to give Dave a call to bring his talent and passion to your project.